I didn't find out my marriage was ending in a hotel room, or in the arms of another woman, or in some cinematic confession. I found out because my husband's phone was glowing in the dark like a small, ugly secret that refused to stay buried. It was late. The house was quiet in that way it only gets when you've finally wrestled young kids into sleep, when the silence isn't peaceful, just fragile. I was walking our youngest back to bed, half asleep myself, moving on instinct and routine. When I passed the doorway to the kids' room, I saw my husband sprawled there, snoring softly, one arm flung over a pillow like he belonged to a different life than mine. His phone was beside him, screen lit, playing a video at the top. And underneath it, clear as day, was an active message thread. Not just any thread. Her. The woman from the gym he'd sworn was nothing. The one he called a twin flame. Like that phrase was supposed to make betrayal sound spiritual instead of selfish. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might actually be sick. My hands went cold, then started shaking so badly I had to brace my wrist against the edge of the nightstand to keep the phone steady. I read it once, then again because my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. "I smell you," he had written. Her reply was an emoji, sweet, flirtatious, intimate in the way only people who've been sharing a private world can be. Then he sent her something else, a post, sexual, casual, like our vows were nothing but background noise. I stood there in that dim room, with my heart punching against my ribs, listening to him breathe like an innocent man while my entire body screamed, "So this is what you were doing while you left me to drown." I didn't cry. Not yet. I lifted my own phone with shaking fingers and recorded the screen, because vanishing messages don't vanish if you refuse to let them. And then, without thinking, I sent the video to her husband. 2 seconds later, I texted my husband, "We're done." He replied like I was the problem. "Can you not? At least wait until the kids are out of the house." That's when I understood. The affair wasn't the cruelest part. The cruelest part was how calmly he expected me to carry it. I'm 41, the kind of woman who used to believe stability was the highest form of love. 15 years of marriage will do that to you. Train your nervous system to relax into routines, to trust the familiar rhythm of dinners, school drop-offs, grocery lists, shared calendars. It makes you think that even if passion fades, the foundation stays. Because foundations don't just crack overnight, right? My husband is 44. For most of our marriage, if you asked me to describe him, I would have said reserved, introverted, disciplined. He worked from home full-time, organized, steady, good at being consistent. Not the type who flirted loudly or chased attention. He didn't even have many close friends, which was sometimes lonely for him, sometimes frustrating for me, but mostly it felt harmless. I told myself, at least he's not out running around. I worked partly in office, partly remote. We had young kids. Life was exhausting in the normal way. Sticky hands, laundry mountains, the constant low buzz of responsibility. But it was ours. And that's why, when he first mentioned her, I didn't panic. It was one random evening, so casual it almost sounded like he was talking about a new podcast. "Hey," he said, cutting his food like the conversation didn't matter. "There's this woman I've been talking to at the gym. Interesting person. I actually think you two would get along." I remember looking up at him and blinking, like my brain needed a second to catch up. My husband, making friends, suggesting a double date. It was odd. He added, almost proudly, "Maybe I can set it up sometime. Meet her and her husband." Something in me filed it away as weird but not alarming. Because if he was openly telling me about her, it must not be threatening. That was the logic. That was the trap. Then, nothing. Weeks turned into months. No mention of her. No, "Hey, we're meeting them." No follow-up. Absolute silence. And because life with kids is a treadmill you can't step off, I didn't press. Last summer, things shifted in a way that felt small at first. One night I mentioned that the next day I might need to work remotely because I had a doctor's appointment. Just normal scheduling talk. He paused, took a sip of water. And then, like he was announcing the weather, he said, "Oh, you know that woman I mentioned ages ago from the gym? She and I are grabbing lunch tomorrow." My fork stopped midair. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, tighter. My chest went hot, then hollow. "What?" I said, and my voice came out sharper than I expected. "One-on-one lunch?" He looked genuinely surprised by my reaction, like he'd forgotten that marriage is built on considering your partner. "It's not a big deal," he said quickly. "Just lunch." I told him no. Immediately. Clearly. No drama, no screaming. Just a boundary that felt basic enough it shouldn't have needed to be spoken. To his credit, he backed down fast. Okay, fine, I won't go. But that moment cracked something open, because once the lunch plan surfaced, the rest poured out like a dam breaking. He started talking about her like she wasn't just a gym acquaintance. He called it an uncanny connection. Listed off rare things they had in common, specific interests, odd coincidences, the kind of overlap that made it feel curated, manufactured, like he'd been collecting details about her, assembling her into a story. And then he said the phrase that still makes my stomach twist. She thinks we might be twin flames. Twin flames. As if betrayal could be dressed up in spiritual vocabulary and become less inappropriate. He insisted it wasn't romantic, that twin flames were about growth, not sex, not love. He even joked that maybe one of my male friends could be my twin flame. I remember staring at him across the table, trying to find the man I trusted in his face, trying to understand how he could say something so intimate, so emotionally loaded, and expect me to smile politely. That was the beginning, not the end. The beginning of me realizing I had been living with a man who could hide an entire emotional world behind calm eyes and call it harmless. After that night, the house didn't feel the same. Nothing had technically happened yet. No caught kisses, no hotel receipts, no smoking gun, but the air between us thickened with questions he couldn't or wouldn't answer cleanly. Every time I tried to move on, something else surfaced. Another detail, another omission. That's how it started to rot. I asked him the questions that felt reasonable, not accusatory. Did he have her phone number? No, he said too quickly. We just message on social media. Had they been talking a lot? On and off, mostly gym stuff. Was he physically attracted to her? No, he said firmly. Not my type. I wanted to believe him. God, I did. Because believing him meant my life didn't have to shatter into a million sharp pieces. Believing him meant I could stay married without feeling like a fool. But even as he spoke, something in his tone felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced these answers alone before ever sharing them with me. He told me her own husband had concerns about their closeness too, but that once she explained the twin flame idea, it made things easier. That sentence stuck in my throat. Because if her husband had concerns, then this wasn't nothing. Men don't get uneasy over benign friendships that stay in appropriate lanes. They get uneasy when boundaries blur. I tried to slow things down instead of blowing them up. I told him I was uncomfortable, that this dynamic felt too intimate, that if this friendship was going to exist at all, it needed very clear boundaries, full transparency, no secrets, no surprises. He agreed, nodded, promised. And then the slow unraveling began. Little things at first. I found out she was his physical type after all. Dark hair, athletic build, younger. When I confronted him, he brushed it off as irrelevant, like attraction only matters if you act on it. Then I learned they weren't just working out at our usual gym location. They were coordinating sessions at other branches in the same franchise, different locations, different times, choices that required intention. She brought conversation card games to the gym, those deep emotional decks meant for couples or close friends. She called him Sensei. She sent him good morning messages at 4 in the morning. 4 in the morning. Who messages a married man at 4 a.m. unless they already believe they have access to him? She gave him small gifts, nothing extravagant, just personal, thoughtful, intimate. A customized first aid kit for his gym bag. The kind of thing you give someone when you're paying attention to the details of their life. His explanation? She wants to compete in bodybuilding, he said. I'm coaching her, nutrition, training. She looks up to me. Every word felt like a rationalization wrapped in faux humility. Meanwhile, we were arguing daily. I cried more in those weeks than I had in years. I told him over and over that her behavior felt girlfriend adjacent, that the problem wasn't just her, it was his failure to shut it down, his willingness to let her take up emotional space that used to belong to us. Then came the double date. We were running late, kids with a sitter, tension already humming beneath the surface. My phone buzzed on the console. It was her, texting him directly. That's how I found out he absolutely did have her phone number. Another lie, casually exposed. Meeting them in person didn't make things better. She was 33, no job, no kids, bright-eyed and overly familiar. Her husband seemed polite enough, but there was something tight around his mouth when he looked at her, and when he looked at my husband. Like he knew something was off but hadn't found the words yet. After that night, I stopped sleeping properly. I replayed conversations, noticed gaps, The way my husband corrected himself mid-sentence. The way he'd downplay one detail, then accidentally reveal another. I kept asking myself the same question on repeat. If this is so innocent, why does it feel like I'm being slowly erased? That's when I started realizing the truth most people don't want to face. Affairs don't begin with sex. They begin with secrecy. The night everything finally snapped wasn't loud. There were no slammed doors, no screaming match, no dramatic confession delivered through tears. It was quiet in the way devastation often is, surgical, precise, irreversible. We'd been arguing for weeks by then, the same circular conversations, me explaining why this friendship felt wrong, him insisting I was overreacting, misunderstanding, being controlling. Every discussion ended with me feeling smaller, crazier, more exhausted than the last. That evening, after yet another emotionally draining conversation, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I checked his email. Not because I wanted to be a detective, not because I enjoyed the invasion, but because something in me had finally accepted that I was being fed a curated version of reality, and I needed the truth even if it broke me. I found it almost immediately, an email he'd written to himself. The timestamp made my breath hitch. It was dated the day before he'd originally planned that lunch with her. The lunch I'd vetoed. The lunch he claimed was harmless. The email wasn't logistical. It wasn't work-related. It was intimate. A list of thoughts, questions, things he wanted to ask her. Had she been dreaming about him? If she had, were the dreams positive or negative? He wanted to know details about her childhood, her family dynamics, her emotional wounds. Then it went deeper. He wrote about missing her intensely, about feeling unable to express it directly, about an awkward attempt he'd made to screenshot a message she sent him on a vanishing messenger app, followed by an apology to her for failing to capture it properly. There were notes about her clothing, her shoe size. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands numb, my chest tight like someone had wrapped wire around my lungs. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't friendship. This was emotional intimacy, so raw and unfiltered, it felt like I'd walked into a room I was never supposed to see. I confronted him that night. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told him it was over. The words came out calm, almost detached, like my nervous system had already decided survival required shutting something down. That's when he broke. He cried, actually sobbed, said he knew it had gone too far, claimed he'd already planned to end the friendship, swore she'd beaten him to it. According to him, her husband had finally issued an ultimatum, said her obsession was unhealthy, unacceptable, and had to stop, so she was the one who officially called it off. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream, because the implication was clear. If her husband hadn't intervened, this would have continued, possibly escalated. But we had kids, young ones, and the relationship, he insisted, was supposedly over. Against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming in my body, I agreed to try. I told him the conditions were non-negotiable. He had to block her everywhere. Phone, social media, every platform. No contact, ever. He had to switch gyms entirely. And we needed professional help. He agreed to everything. I wanted to believe him. Because believing him meant I didn't have to dismantle my entire life. It meant our kids didn't have to watch their parents fall apart. We started marriage counseling the week after Thanksgiving. I told myself this was the turning point. It wasn't. Because lies don't stop just because they've been exposed. They evolve. And trust, once shattered, doesn't crack cleanly. It splinters quietly, invisibly, until one small moment brings the whole structure down. And for me, that moment came months later, glowing softly in the dark. After we agreed to work on us, I lived in a constant state of suspended breath. On the surface, things looked improved. We started marriage counseling. He blocked her. At least that's what he showed me. He said all the right things in sessions, about accountability, about rebuilding trust, about how close he'd come to losing everything. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. I wasn't exploding. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't throwing ultimatums around like weapons. I was watching. Every word he said passed through a filter now. Every delay, every pause, every time his phone buzzed and his body reacted before his brain could hide it. I kept asking myself the same question in quieter and quieter ways. Why do I feel like I'm the only one truly afraid of losing this marriage? January arrived with no fanfare and very little peace. One afternoon, he told me, casually, again, always casually, that over the holidays he'd stopped by the old gym location a few times, just briefly, and had run into them, her and her husband. He waited 3 weeks to tell me. I remember gripping the edge of the counter, nodding while my stomach twisted. I was furious, but worse, I felt foolish for the tiny flicker of hope that sparked anyway. At least he told me, I thought. Even if late, maybe honesty is starting to happen. That hope didn't last. A week later, he admitted she'd started showing up at his new gym location. My chest went tight. I reminded him, calmly, clearly, of the boundary. No contact, no interaction, no accidental reconnections. He promised again. Around that same time, he began resisting counseling. Postponing exercises, delaying conversations, blaming exhaustion, blaming our youngest child's sleep schedule. "Can we just do it next week?" became his default response to anything that required emotional labor. Then he started sleeping in the kids' room most nights. He framed it as helpful, practical, a solution to everyone being tired. I disagreed, but I was so worn down that fighting felt impossible. Still, my instincts were screaming. I started checking his phone again, his email, his computer. I didn't find direct communication, but I found fragments, ghosts of intention, deleted web searches, synonyms for beautiful woman, different ways to say good morning, phrases that felt rehearsed. At the same time, he started leaving affectionate notes in my car, little scraps of paper telling me he loved me. I clung to them like life rafts. I told myself maybe I was paranoid. Maybe the searches were for crossword puzzles. Maybe the notes were genuine. Maybe I was destroying us by refusing to let the past stay buried. My best friend tried to ground me. She said something I didn't want to hear. Either I had to truly forgive him and stop surveilling, or accept that it was already over. Exhausted, empty, desperate to believe in something solid again, I decided to stop looking. That decision lasted exactly 1 week. The night everything ended didn't feel dramatic in the moment. It felt instinctual. I was walking our youngest back to bed. My husband was already asleep in the room, phone beside him, a video playing quietly. I reached for the phone to plug it in, and then I saw it. The video filled the top half of the screen. Below it was an active Instagram conversation, vanishing messages. With her. My vision tunneled. My hands started shaking so badly I thought I might drop the phone. The message stared back at me like it wanted to be seen. "I smell you." Her response was intimate, playful, knowing. Then he sent her something else. Sexual, casual, familiar. In that moment, something in me went still. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't wake him. I lifted my own phone and recorded the screen, capturing the proof before it could disappear like everything else he'd erased. Then I did something I'd never planned to do. I sent the video to her husband. After that, I texted my husband 2 words. "We're done." His response wasn't panic. It wasn't remorse. It was inconvenience. "Can you not? Or at least wait until the kids are out of the house?" That was the moment I stopped questioning myself. Because no man who loves his wife responds to betrayal by asking her to make it quieter. Once the truth surfaced, it didn't come out clean. It came out in pieces, ragged, defensive, self-serving fragments that only made everything worse. The next morning, the house felt radioactive. Every surface held the residue of what I'd seen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't need to. I already knew. That night, the one I'd caught the messages, he tried to minimize, said I'd misunderstood, said it looked bad, but wasn't what it seemed. He leaned hard on the same excuse he'd used before. Nothing physical happened. As if emotional betrayal were some lesser crime. When that didn't work, more truth started leaking out. He admitted that after that December gym encounter, the one he waited weeks to tell me about, she'd found him on MyFitnessPal, of all places. He claimed he hadn't given her his information, that she'd just figured it out. She messaged him there because she was blocked everywhere else. He said he ignored her at first. Then he said she followed up, telling him she was deeply depressed, that she didn't know how to cope without him, that she was losing her will to live. And suddenly he felt responsible. He told her to lean on her husband, he said, but she kept pushing, and eventually he admitted that he missed her too. That was when they decided their spouses were being unfair. That's when they resumed contact, secretly. Instagram vanishing messages, unblock, message, reblock. A system designed specifically to deceive me. I asked him how long. He hesitated. Then the timeline unraveled like a pulled thread. Let's say I found the messages on a Monday night. On Tuesday, he told me he needed space, said he couldn't handle my nagging, and needed time to think. That afternoon, he took her to lunch. Not just anywhere, her favorite restaurant, chosen specifically because he didn't want to be seen. On Wednesday, I lost my composure for the first time, crying, yelling, breaking under the weight of betrayal. On Thursday and Friday, I was away on a pre-planned business trip. While I was gone, they worked out together. She cried on his shoulder. On Friday, they had lunch again, this time at his favorite restaurant. On Saturday, they met at Starbucks. It was during that meeting, after all of this, that she told him her husband wanted them to take a 2-week break to focus on repairing their marriage. By the time he told me this, I'd already scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney. When I asked why he hadn't told me any of this sooner, he said something I will never forget. I didn't think it mattered since I wasn't technically lying. Technically, because in his warped logic, meeting her in parking lots and hugging before workouts didn't count as talking in the gym. Because unblocking someone briefly didn't count as contact. Because if I didn't ask the exact right question, he felt justified in withholding the answer. The escalation didn't stop there. I learned from her husband, because yes, we spoke, that she identified as polyamorous. Something my husband had known the entire time and never disclosed to me. He knew, and he kept it from me. I also learned they'd had detailed sexual conversations. Likes, dislikes, preferences. She'd invited him to join her in New York for a bodybuilding competition. He claimed he declined, but only because it would have been impossible to hide. Not because it was wrong, because it was inconvenient. When I retained the divorce attorney, his attitude shifted. At first he was defiant, angry, accusatory. I was controlling, overreacting, ruining everything over a friendship. Then the papers became real. Suddenly he wanted to fix things. Could I please find a new marriage counselor? Could we slow down? Wasn't I being hasty? The irony would have been laughable if it didn't hurt so much. Every boundary I'd asked for, every basic request for respect, had only been honored after I threatened to leave. Even then, it felt like he was doing the minimum required to keep the house from burning down, not because he understood the damage he'd caused. Meanwhile, I was trapped. My name wasn't on the mortgage. Months earlier, without telling me, he'd stopped paying my credit card bill, a card we'd agreed he'd handle, used primarily for household expenses. My credit score had plummeted from over 800 to the low 500s. I couldn't move out. I couldn't file immediately. I was financially handcuffed to the man who had just dismantled my trust piece by piece. So I told him the truth. He had until the mandatory separation period ended to show me, through actions, not words, that he wasn't the selfish, dishonest man his behavior had revealed. Not for reconciliation, for dignity. Because by then, I already knew something irreversible had happened. And the closer we got to the edge, the clearer it became that I was standing there alone. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from sharing a house with someone who has already left you emotionally. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. It settles into your bones and makes even breathing feel like work. Those months after everything came out were the lowest point of my life, not because of a single dramatic moment, but because of the slow erosion of hope. We lived under the same roof, slept in separate rooms, moved around each other like ghosts, bound by shared obligations and unspoken resentment. He kept insisting we could still fix things. I stopped believing him. Every day felt like emotional whiplash. One moment he'd be apologetic, subdued, talking about change. The next, defensive, framing himself as misunderstood, as if circumstances had simply happened to him. Meanwhile, I was unraveling quietly. I barely slept. When I did, my dreams were relentless. Scenes of him laughing with her, of me trying to speak and no sound coming out. I woke up with my jaw clenched, shoulders tight, heart racing like I'd just run from something chasing me. I blame myself more than I want to admit. Maybe if I hadn't worked in the office so much. Maybe if I'd been more fun. Maybe if I hadn't pushed back so hard in the beginning. Those thoughts crept in late at night, when exhaustion made self-blame feel logical instead of cruel. What broke me wasn't even the affair itself. It was the realization that every step toward repair had to be dragged out of him. He only blocked her after I caught him. He only switched gyms after I threatened divorce. He only talked about therapy when he felt cornered. Nothing was proactive. Nothing was instinctive. Love, I realized, doesn't need to be coerced. I started thinking about the kids constantly. How we ate dinner together, but weren't really together. How tension lived in the walls. How they watched us more closely than we realized. The idea of staying for them suddenly felt like a lie wrapped in good intentions. One night, after everyone else was asleep, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off. My phone lay face down on the coffee table. The house hummed softly, appliances cycling, the distant sound of traffic. I pressed my palms into my thighs and asked myself a question I'd been avoiding for months. If nothing ever changes, can I survive this? The answer came immediately. No, I couldn't survive another year of second guessing. Another holiday, wondering if he was lying. Another therapy session where I did the emotional labor while he nodded along, waiting for things to calm down. I couldn't survive modeling this for my children, teaching them that love looks like suspicion, sacrifice, and silence. That night, something shifted. Not anger, not resolve. Acceptance. I accepted that the marriage I thought I had didn't exist anymore. I accepted that the man I married wasn't the man standing in front of me now. And I accepted that staying wouldn't make me noble, it would make me disappear. That realization was terrifying. It meant grief, financial chaos, a fractured family, judgment from people who would never know the full story. But it also meant relief. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't asking him to choose me. I was choosing myself. The turning point didn't arrive with clarity or confidence. It arrived with paperwork. Mandatory separation laws don't care about broken trust or emotional devastation. They care about timelines, forms, waiting periods. And in a strange way, that cold bureaucracy saved me, because it forced me to stop circling the same emotional drain and start planning an exit like a woman who intended to survive. We were officially separated by the end of April. Same house, different lives. I stopped arguing. That alone unsettled him more than any accusation ever had. When I stopped asking questions, stopped pushing for explanations, stopped reacting to his justifications, he didn't know what to do with me. Silence removed the stage he'd been performing on. That's when the real changes began. He blocked her everywhere, again. This time showing me without being asked. He switched to a completely different gym, one not affiliated with the franchise they'd used as a playground for secrecy. He started leaving longer notes, asking deeper questions, talking about the future like it was still something we shared. But I was already gone. The turning point wasn't about proof anymore. It was about pattern recognition. I watched his behavior through a new lens, one stripped of hope and denial, and what I saw was painfully consistent. He reacted, he never led. He changed only when consequences were unavoidable. He apologized only when abandonment was imminent. I didn't need another message to disappear or another lie to surface. I finally understood something fundamental, even if he never spoke to her again. The man who chose secrecy, validation, and escape over integrity would still be the man I was married to. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life policing someone's loyalty. Around this time, I focused on the one thing I could control, my financial independence. My credit score was a disaster. Rebuilding it felt impossible at first. Endless phone calls, negotiations with creditors, disputes. Living on the tightest budget I'd ever known. Every dollar accounted for, every purchase intentional. It was exhausting, but it was also grounding. Each small improvement felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he'd quietly taken without permission. During this period, he asked, more than once, if I'd reconsider marriage counseling. Every time my answer was the same. No, not because I hated him, because I didn't trust him. And trust isn't rebuilt by scheduling sessions. It's rebuilt by consistent, self-driven change. Therapy only works when someone shows up already committed to growth, not when they're hoping a counselor can talk their partner into staying. Friends who'd initially urged patience slowly shifted their stance as I shared more details. The lunches, the lies, the credit card. The way he'd chosen her comfort repeatedly over my safety. By the end, even they stopped asking if reconciliation was possible. They started asking how soon I could leave. The final clarity came quietly one afternoon while I was folding laundry. Something so mundane it almost felt cruel. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even heartbroken in the way I'd expected. I was done. No adrenaline, no urgency, just a steady certainty that this marriage had already ended. I was just the last one to accept it. When my credit score finally climbed high enough to make renting possible, I didn't hesitate. I found a modest townhouse not far from the kids' school. Nothing fancy, but safe. Mine. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a reaction anymore. This was a decision. Leaving didn't feel triumphant. It felt surgical. By the time moving day arrived, I had already grieved the marriage in private, piece by piece, over months of disappointment and emotional withdrawal. What remained wasn't rage. It was a quiet, determined resolve to stop bleeding in the same place. He offered to help me pack. I said no, not out of spite, but because I needed to do it myself. Every box I sealed felt like reclaiming a decision I should have made earlier. I moved methodically, efficiently, focusing on logistics because emotions threatened to spill if I slowed down. The kids watched with wide, confused eyes. We explained it gently, carefully. 2 homes, same love, nothing was their fault. I kept my voice steady while my chest burned. They didn't need to see me break. When I closed the door of the new townhouse for the first time, the silence inside it felt different from the silence I'd lived with for months. This one didn't accuse me. It didn't hum with tension. It waited. I filed for divorce immediately. The legal process wasn't explosive like people imagine. No courtroom shouting matches, no dramatic revelations. Just long email chains, financial disclosures, negotiations that felt more like accounting than heartbreak. That didn't make it easier. He tried, quietly, persistently, to recast himself as the wounded party. He hinted that my refusal to tolerate his friendship was extreme, that I'd given up too fast, that this could have been fixed if I'd been more understanding. But the facts didn't bend. The unpaid credit card, the secret lunches, the months of deception after being caught. Every attempt to rewrite history collapsed under its own weight. Child custody was the only area where we managed to stay grounded. Shared custody, alternating weeks. It hurt more than anything else to agree to time without my children, but dragging them through a prolonged legal war would have hurt them more. We chose the least damaging path available. He complied. He showed up on time. He followed schedules. But trust, the kind required for real partnership, even in co-parenting, was gone. I interacted with him like a colleague. Polite, brief, functional. Nothing more. As the divorce finalized, something else happened. Something subtle but unmistakable. People stopped taking his side. Friends who'd once urged me to be patient began acknowledging the pattern. Family members who'd stayed neutral started asking questions. Even those who didn't openly support my decision stopped challenging it. Consequences didn't arrive with fanfare. They arrived as distance, as reputations quietly shifting, as the slow realization that he wasn't the misunderstood victim he'd painted himself to be. And I didn't have to orchestrate any of it. I didn't expose him. I didn't campaign against him. I simply told the truth when asked and let it stand. The fallout wasn't dramatic. It was permanent. When the divorce was finalized, there was no moment of catharsis, no sudden relief, just exhaustion so deep it felt physical. Signing those papers felt like crossing a finish line I never wanted to run toward. But when I walked out of the lawyer's office, something surprised me. I felt lighter. Not happy, not healed, but no longer tethered to a lie I'd been carrying alone. He made his choices again and again. I didn't ruin his life. I stopped sacrificing mine to preserve his comfort. Life after divorce doesn't arrive wrapped in relief. It arrives quietly, like waking up in a room where the noise has finally stopped, but your ears are still ringing. The first months were strange. My time split into 2 distinct worlds. Weeks with my children, filled with schedules, homework, laughter, exhaustion, and weeks alone, where the silence felt both peaceful and heavy. I learned quickly that healing isn't linear. Some days I felt strong, grounded, even proud. Other days, a song in the grocery store or a random memory would hit me so hard I had to sit in my car and breathe until the feeling passed. But beneath all of it, there was something new. Stability. Not the kind I once confused with endurance or self-sacrifice, but real stability. The kind that comes from knowing I wasn't being lied to. That I didn't need to check phones or read between the lines of half-truths, that my emotional safety no longer depended on someone else's honesty. I rebuilt slowly. My finances first, painfully, deliberately, one responsible decision at a time. Then my sense of self. Then my capacity for trust, not toward another partner, but toward my own instincts. The same instincts I'd silenced for months while trying to keep a marriage intact. The kids adjusted better than I feared. Children are remarkably perceptive. They notice the absence of tension long before they could articulate it. They didn't need perfect parents. They needed honest ones. As for him, we coexist. We co-parent. We communicate when necessary. But the man I once loved lives only in memory now. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm. I simply no longer make space for him at the center of my life. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. Love is not proven by how much pain you're willing to tolerate. Loyalty is not silence. And boundaries are not punishments, they're acts of self-respect. Emotional affairs don't begin with sex. They begin when someone chooses secrecy over integrity and validation over accountability. And when someone shows you, repeatedly, that your pain is negotiable, believe them. Leaving didn't mean I failed. It meant I refused to disappear. I don't know what the future holds. Happiness feels less like a destination now and more like a practice. But I wake up each day knowing one thing with absolute certainty. I chose myself, and that choice saved me.